In the thick stillness of early morning, long before the sun dared rise over the frost-covered towers of the castle, a girl no older than 13 sat motionless on a stone bench, her bare feet tucked beneath her. Her breath came in soft white clouds, like whispers lost to the chill. The silence of the corridor was not peaceful. It was heavy, like a curtain drawn across her youth. Her name was Eleanor, and today she would learn what it meant to be born royal. To the world outside, royalty in medieval times meant silks, feasts, and gold, a life wrapped in beauty. But inside the cold stone walls of power, especially for royal women, it was a life carved out in silence, duty, and fear. They were born to be daughters, offered to distant kings. Born to be wives, handed to strangers twice their age. Born to be mothers, expected to deliver heirs before they fully understood what it meant to carry a child. The crown was never light, especially on a woman's head. Eleanor had never left the castle grounds, not even once. The walls were her sky, her world, her prison. She was taught to sew with delicate fingers, to recite scriptures in Latin, and to walk without sound. But she was never taught to run, never taught to scream, and never, ever taught to say no. Across the courtyard, the chapel bell rang 3 times. A signal. She knew what that meant. Her mother, Queen Agnes, had said it plainly the night before, her voice barely louder than the wind. "Tomorrow, you will be presented." Eleanor had nodded, though she didn't know what she was being presented for. She only knew that her gowns had been changed. Her hair had been washed with rose water. Her food had become light and simple, as if preparing her for a fast. Royal girls were not told everything. They were expected to obey. Curiosity was not a trait encouraged in court. Neither was comfort. From a high window above, a figure watched her. Lady Beatrix, the governess who had raised dozens of noble daughters for roles they never chose, sighed as she traced the frost on the glass. She had seen many girls take this first step, and she knew the weight of it. She also knew that silence was a woman's armor, as she had taught Eleanor well. But deep in her heart, she feared this one might break. The royal court was arriving today. Not just their own nobles, but envoys from the north. One in particular, Lord Roderick, a widowed duke in his 40s, had shown keen interest in Eleanor's name. A strategic alliance, they said. A vital match, they said. But none asked what the girl herself said. That question was not part of the arrangement. In the days of medieval kingdoms, royal women were currency. Valuable, fragile, easily traded. Their lives were marked by silence and ceremony. Every movement was watched, every word judged. From the moment they could stand, they were dressed to please. From the moment they could speak, they were taught to hold their tongue. Eleanor had a younger sister, Isabel, only 10, still rosy with childish dreams. She believed that queens wore jewels and held gardens in their hands. But Eleanor knew the truth now. Her mother wore heavy rings not for beauty, but for power. And those gardens were not hers. They were the king's, as was everything else. Even her voice. Their mother, Queen Agnes, had once been the pride of Aquitaine. Married off at 14, she had carried 7 children and buried 3. Her eyes had dulled with each passing winter, but her posture never slumped. She was born to endure, and she had. Now, she prepared her eldest daughter to do the same. In the great hall, servants scrubbed floors and polished silver. Flags were hung. A new rug was unrolled down the steps of the throne, imported from the east and reserved for special guests. The castle buzzed with the kind of energy that didn't come from joy, but obligation. Everyone knew the girl would be judged today, not for her mind, but her manners. Not for her dreams, but her dowry. Eleanor stood now at the edge of her world, her fingers trembling slightly beneath her sleeves. She could hear the gates creaking open, the horses clattering into the courtyard, the shouts of men too loud for the cold air. She wasn't ready, but readiness wasn't required of her, only obedience. She turned once to glance at her sister's window. Isabel was watching from behind the curtain, eyes wide, pressing her fingers to the glass. Eleanor gave a soft nod, as if to say, "It's all right," though she knew it wasn't. There were stories of women who vanished after marriage. Some to faraway kingdoms, others to locked towers, never to write home again. Royal women were not always remembered by name, but by whom they belonged to. Lady Beatrix entered quietly and handed Eleanor a cloak. "You must go now," she said. "They're waiting." Eleanor nodded, though her knees felt weak. Her feet moved on their own, down the corridor, past the Hall of Ancestors, through the shadowed colonnade where tapestries whispered of past queens, some brave, some broken, all silent. She paused at the doors of the court chamber. Behind them was her future, shaped by men she had never met. No one asked if she wanted it. And yet, beyond the heavy wood and iron bolts, a quiet tension hung. Something unexpected, a murmur from the guards, a shift in tone. Someone had arrived unannounced. Queen Agnes narrowed her eyes from the throne. She whispered to her chamberlain. "Did he bring her?" "No, your grace," the man whispered. "But he brings news." Lady Beatrix frowned. She could feel something in the air, like a draft under a locked door. Eleanor, her hand raised to knock, heard it too. A voice inside, low and unfamiliar, speaking of a royal death. A princess gone missing. A broken treaty. Everything paused. Outside, the bells did not ring again. The wind picked up. Isabel stepped back from a window, her breath caught in her throat. And Eleanor, her fingers still resting on the door, slowly stepped away. The path she was being forced toward had just shifted beneath her feet. And somewhere in the echo of the cold stone walls, she felt the first flicker of something dangerous. Not fear, but choice. And for the first time, she didn't feel entirely powerless. What that choice would mean, however, she didn't yet know. But behind the door, fate was being rewritten, and the life that Eleanor had quietly prepared for was no longer guaranteed. Not in a world where queens could disappear overnight. Not in a kingdom where silence was finally cracking. Not in a court where royal women were no longer willing to suffer without question. And certainly not in a story that was only just beginning. The corridor felt colder now, as if the very stones had absorbed the sudden change. Eleanor didn't move. Her hand, still half lifted toward the door, slowly lowered. She took a step back, her heart thudding just a little louder than before. Something was wrong inside that room. She could feel it, not in the loud way disasters announced themselves, but in the quiet tension that always came before them. Voices rose and fell behind the great oak doors. One was her mother's, low and composed. Another belonged to the messenger, a stranger's voice, firm, but not disrespectful. Then, silence again, the kind of silence that made your skin tighten and your breath catch. Eleanor stood still, unsure whether she should flee or go forward. Lady Beatrix appeared beside her without warning, her eyes unusually alert. "Return to your chamber," she whispered. "Quickly. Say nothing." Eleanor obeyed, not because she was scared, though she was, but because the look in Beatrix's eyes said this was no longer about a simple presentation. This was about something far bigger, and possibly far more dangerous. She moved down the corridor, past the line of tapestries, each stitched with a queen's image, eyes downcast, hands folded, always proper. But now, the images felt different. Eleanor had once admired them, seeing grace. Now she only saw resignation. The stone stairs echoed as she climbed, back toward her rooms at the eastern end of the castle. As she passed a window, she looked out over the snowy courtyard. The royal envoy's horses stood in tight formation, their riders stiff with cold and duty. But one man stood apart. He wasn't dressed like the others. He wore no crest. His cloak was thick and plain. He didn't look up, just stood still, as though waiting for the wind to change. Back in her chamber, Eleanor shut the heavy door behind her and leaned against it. Her maid, young Cecily, looked up from folding linens. "They sent you back?" Cecily asked, surprised. "There's been news," Eleanor replied, unsure of how much to say. "Something unexpected." Cecily nodded slowly. She'd grown up inside the castle, too, though not under the same weight. Still, she understood the rules of silence. "I'll warm the brazier," she said, heading toward the hearth. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, twisting her fingers in her lap. The presentation was delayed, perhaps even canceled. But that wasn't comfort. That was uncertainty. And in a royal court, uncertainty was often more dangerous than a plan, no matter how cruel the plan might have been. Somewhere beneath her chamber, in the belly of the castle, voices were still murmuring. Decisions were being made. Secrets being passed between lips that knew how to never speak too loudly. A royal death had been mentioned. A missing princess. Eleanor didn't know who, but she knew enough to realize that when one royal woman vanished, another often took her place. The afternoon wore on in strange quiet. No visitors came to her room. No summoning bells rang. Even the usual rhythm of court, footsteps, chatter, the rustling of pages, felt absent, like the entire castle was holding its breath. As dusk fell, the sky turned a pale gray, with streaks of violet creeping across the horizon. Snow had started again, thin flakes drifting lazily onto the courtyard stones. From her window, Eleanor watched as one of the guards rode out alone, carrying a sealed scroll strapped to his saddle. A message sent quickly. That was never good. Then, just after nightfall, Queen Agnes herself entered her chamber. Cecily scrambled to bow, but Agnes raised a hand. "Leave us," she said, gently but firmly. The maid left without a word, closing the door behind her. Eleanor stood as her mother approached. The queen looked tired, but not fragile. She never allowed herself that luxury. "Sit with me," Agnes said, lowering herself into the cushioned chair by the hearth. Eleanor obeyed. The fire crackled softly between them. For a long moment, her mother said nothing. She simply stared into the flames. "There's been a death," Agnes finally said. "Princess Johanna of Boreal. Do you know the name?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. She was to marry the son of King Aldred of the Northlands next spring, her mother continued. "A powerful match, one that kept peace between our borders." Agnes paused, then turned to her daughter. "She was found 2 days ago, dead, in the woods beyond her father's estate. No witnesses, no clear cause, and no answers." Eleanor's breath caught. She wasn't sure what to say. "Her betrothal meant balance," the queen went on. "Now that balance is gone. What will happen?" Eleanor asked quietly. Queen Agnes looked at her long and hard, and then spoke words that made the fire feel suddenly cold. "They may ask for another." Eleanor's throat tightened. "You mean me?" "I mean," her mother said slowly, "that your name may be spoken. Not today, but soon." The silence between them thickened. Eleanor looked into her mother's eyes and tried to understand what was behind them. Fear? Regret? Or simply calculation? "You've prepared me for this," Eleanor said after a long pause. Agnes nodded. "I've tried, but I don't want it. No one ever does." The queen stood slowly, her hands clasped before her. "There will be a feast tomorrow. The court must see that we remain strong. You will attend, in your blue gown." Eleanor didn't argue. She just nodded. Her mother reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You have always been the quiet one," she said softly. "But quiet does not mean weak." Then, without another word, she turned and left the room. The firelight flickered. The room felt both smaller and more hollow than before. Eleanor sat alone in the growing dark, her thoughts circling endlessly. A dead princess, a broken alliance, and now, possibly, a new betrothal on the horizon. Her life, already shaped by duty, was now being shaped by shadows she couldn't see. She looked out the window one last time. Snow was still falling. In the courtyard, the strange man in the plain cloak was gone. But in her heart, Eleanor knew something had changed forever. The silence that had ruled her world was cracking, and behind it, something was beginning to stir, something that might one day speak. But for now, all she could do was wait. Wait, and wonder who she would be if given the choice to be anything at all. The answer, for now, remained just beyond her reach. The candle on her bedside table burned low, its flame flickering against the stone walls. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She lay beneath thick wool blankets, eyes open, staring at the carved wooden beams above her bed. Every now and then, she could hear footsteps in the hallway or the distant creak of a door. But no one came to her. The castle was quieter than usual, and when sleep did begin to tug at her, it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind filled with half-formed dreams, of women in dark veils, of voices whispering names she didn't know, and of endless corridors with no doors. When morning finally came, it arrived not with sun, but with a gray, dim light that made the frost outside seem even colder. Eleanor rose without being told. She dressed slowly, her hands stiff from the chill. Cecily helped button her gown and braided her hair into soft loops, pinning it in place with delicate silver combs. The blue dress had been laid out the night before, just as the Queen had instructed. It was velvet, simple in design, but heavy with meaning. The court would expect to see her today, not as a child, but as a woman, one who might soon carry the burden of another's name, another's land, another's fate. Downstairs, the castle stirred with subtle activity. Guards stood taller. Servants moved quicker. The kitchens were already filled with the smell of roasted meats and fresh bread, even though the feast wouldn't begin for hours. Everyone knew eyes would be watching today, noble eyes, foreign eyes. And Eleanor, like it or not, would be among the most watched. She passed the great hallway slowly, walking between the long banners of her ancestors. Each tapestry told a story of battles fought, of kingdoms claimed, of marriages that changed the course of history. Her mother had told her once, in a rare moment of honesty, that most of those marriages had been arranged before the women could even read. In the great chamber, preparations were nearly complete. Long tables stretched across the floor, set with goblets and fine plates. Musicians were tuning their instruments near the corner fireplace. A group of noble women stood in a cluster near the dais, whispering behind jeweled fans. Eleanor entered quietly, feeling their eyes fall on her. Some smiled politely, others simply watched. Queen Agnes sat at the high table, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. She offered a slight nod when Eleanor approached, then gestured for her to sit beside her. "You look well," her mother said without turning her head. "Thank you, Your Grace," Eleanor replied softly. "You will not speak much today. Smile when spoken to. Observe everything." Eleanor nodded. These were familiar instructions. As the hall began to fill, Eleanor felt the pressure build like steam beneath a lid. Lords and ladies from across the region arrived, each dressed in their finest. There were murmurs about the storm that had delayed some guests. Murmurs about the missing princess. But no one said it directly. No one ever did. Then the northern envoys entered. There were 6 of them, tall, broad men in deep forest green cloaks, each bearing the symbol of a silver boar. The eldest among them was Lord Ulrich, brother to the northern king and longtime advisor to the court. His face was marked by age and battle, his beard touched with white. He bowed deeply before the queen, then turned to Eleanor. "My lady," he said, voice low, "your grace and beauty precede you." Eleanor nodded respectfully. "You honor me, my lord." He studied her carefully, but not unkindly. "I knew Princess Johanna well. She was gentle-hearted, clever." "I'm sorry for your loss," Eleanor replied, her voice steady though her stomach turned. Ulrich nodded once more, then turned his attention back to the queen. They spoke in low tones, the kind Eleanor was never invited to hear. And yet she could feel the weight of their words even without knowing them. The feast began. Platters of meat and stewed fruits were passed down the tables. Musicians played softly in the background. Eleanor touched her food, but ate little. She wasn't hungry. Her eyes kept drifting to the northern guests, especially a young man seated beside Lord Ulrich. He was not introduced formally, but something in the way he observed the room suggested importance. His dark hair fell across his brow, and he wore no ring, no badge, no crest. But his eyes, they missed nothing. At one point, their gazes met, just for a moment. He didn't smile. Neither did she. When the first round of music ended, Queen Agnes stood and lifted her goblet. "To peace," she said, "to unity, and to the strength of the ties that bind us." The hall echoed with murmured agreement, but it felt thin, the kind of agreement people gave when they were uncertain what else to do. That evening, long after the feast ended and the guests retired to their rooms, Eleanor remained in the quiet of the West Tower. She had gone there to be alone, to think. The snow had finally stopped, leaving the courtyard below blanketed and still. The stars blinked faintly overhead, dim behind clouds. Lady Beatrix found her there. "You should not wander unescorted," she said gently. "I needed air." Beatrix joined her by the window. "They were watching you." "I know, especially the boy beside Lord Ulrich." Eleanor turned. "Who is he?" Beatrix paused. "He is not officially presented, but rumor says he is the king's nephew. A cousin to the late Princess Johanna's intended. So I'm to be offered in her place. Nothing is decided yet, but things move quickly in times of unrest." Eleanor leaned against the stone ledge. "What if I refuse?" Beatrix did not answer immediately. Then she said, "Royal women do not refuse. They navigate. They survive." The quiet stretched between them. "You told me once that my silence could be my strength," Eleanor said. "Yes, but what if silence becomes the thing that buries me?" Beatrix looked at her, truly looked, then find another way to speak. Later that night, back in her chambers, Eleanor lit a candle and opened the small wooden chest beneath her bed. Inside were the only possessions that were truly hers: old letters, scraps of poetry, dried herbs she collected from the gardens in spring. She pulled out a piece of parchment and dipped her quill. She began to write, not to anyone in particular, but to herself. She wrote of the girl who had once dreamed of wandering the woods beyond the wall. She wrote of the queen who ruled without softness, but not without reason. She wrote of the dead princess, of the weight of duty, and of the boy with no crest who saw everything. She wrote until her hand ached, and when she was finished, she did not hide the letter. She left it on her table in the open, because something inside her had changed. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor did not feel like she was waiting to be chosen. She felt like she might choose for herself, even if the cost was yet unknown. The candle's flame danced as the wind slipped through the cracks in the window, but Eleanor didn't notice. Her hands were still, resting in her lap, the ink on her fingertips dried and flaked from the hours she had spent writing. Outside, the castle lay under a blanket of silence. But inside her chest, her thoughts refused to settle. She had always accepted the life given to her, quietly, respectfully, without question. But now a question had bloomed, and it was not fading. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she watched the stars dim slowly into gray as dawn approached. By morning, the castle had resumed its usual rhythm. Footsteps in the corridors, the occasional clang of armor, voices just beyond closed doors. But there was tension now, tight and invisible like threads stretched between walls. The air was full of it. At breakfast, Queen Agnes was absent. This was unusual. She rarely missed a formal meal, especially when the northern envoys were still in residence. A replacement seat had been set for her, and the others took their places as if nothing was strange. But Eleanor could feel it. Something was being held back. She sat beside Lady Beatrix this time, at one of the lower tables along the wall, not at the Queen's dais. It was another subtle message. Eleanor was no longer simply being watched. She was being measured. How she moved, how she responded, how she adapted when the rules shifted beneath her. The young man from the Northern Party, whose name still hadn't been spoken aloud, entered with a quiet authority, not with loud declarations, but with the quiet understanding that he belonged, even if no one said so. His gaze passed over the room, briefly meeting Eleanor's. She didn't look away this time. Lady Beatrix leaned toward her. "You've noticed him again." "I never stopped." "He noticed you first," she said softly. "Be careful with that. Curiosity from a man in court is like fire. Sometimes it lights a path, sometimes it burns everything." Eleanor glanced back at him. He was speaking now with a southern noble, his posture calm, his face unreadable. "Do you think he is here to replace Johanna?" she asked. "I think," Beatrix replied, "that he may not know why he's here, but someone else does." After breakfast, the court split into its usual tasks. Men gathered in the solar to discuss territories and taxes. Ladies moved to the West Gallery for embroidery and conversation. Eleanor was expected to join them, so she did, though her mind wandered. The gallery overlooked the gardens, now covered in frost and half-melted snow. Thin rays of sunlight slanted across the stone floor, and the fire in the hearth popped gently. The other women spoke of gowns and spices and the latest rumor from the southern coast. Eleanor sat quietly, stitching a length of embroidery she no longer cared for. Suddenly, one of the chamber doors opened. A steward entered and bowed slightly. "Lady Eleanor, the Queen requests your presence in the Old Solar." At once, the gallery quieted. Eleanor stood, tucked her needle away, and left without speaking. She walked quickly through the narrow corridors, turning left through a passage only used by servants. The Old Solar was rarely used now. Smaller, darker, filled with old furniture and dust. It had once belonged to Queen Agnes's mother, who died before Eleanor was born. When she entered, the Queen was alone, seated beside a small brazier. Her hands were wrapped in cloth, warming over the flame. She looked older here, tired, without the crown or the posture of public life. But her voice was still sharp. "Close the door." Eleanor obeyed. "We must speak plainly," Agnes said. "There's little time." Eleanor moved closer, uncertain. "The envoys from the Northlands have requested a new alliance. They seek peace after Johanna's death, and they believe it must come through marriage." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "They want a new bride. They want a royal match," Agnes corrected. "And you are the only eligible daughter of this house." Silence passed between them. Eleanor didn't ask if she had a choice. She already knew the answer. "They have not named the man," the Queen continued. "But I believe it is the one who has taken notice of you." "The young one?" "Yes. His name is Tristan. He is cousin to the crown, raised in court, trained in diplomacy. His presence here was hidden behind the death of Johanna, but his purpose is becoming clearer." Eleanor stood still, the name echoing in her mind. "I will not command you," the Queen said after a long pause. "But I will ask you, do you have reason to object?" Eleanor was surprised. "You're giving me the choice?" "I'm giving you the moment to think. That is more than I was given." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "What if I say no? Then I will find another way. But understand this. Refusing him may not save you from another alliance. It may only delay it. Sometimes, choosing one path prevents a worse one from finding you." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Not yet. That afternoon, Eleanor walked the length of the frost-covered garden paths, escorted only by a silent guard several steps behind. She needed space to breathe, to feel something besides pressure. The air was cold and still. Trees stood bare, their branches like bone against the sky. Her shoes left soft prints in the snow. At the end of the path stood the old garden tower. It had been closed for years, but the door creaked open now just slightly. She paused, then pushed it wider. Inside, it smelled of dust and herbs. Light filtered through slits in the wall, casting faint shapes on the stone. She stepped inside and let the door close behind her. And there, at the far end, stood Tristan. He turned, as if he had been expecting her. "I hoped you'd come," he said. She didn't speak, just watched him. "I saw you at the feast, not as someone being displayed, but as someone aware of the room. You don't speak like the others." "I'm not like the others." A pause. Neither of them moved. "Your cousin was to marry Johanna," she said. "She was kind," he replied. "Too kind for the world she was given. Do you think I would survive it better?" "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think you see it for what it is. That matters." She stepped forward slowly. "Why are you here?" "Because the people I serve believe this kingdom's loyalty must be sealed with blood, and they believe yours is the blood to offer." She didn't flinch, but, he continued, "I've not yet decided if I'll take part in it." Now she flinched. He looked at her carefully. "If we're to be joined, it should not be because others commanded it. If there is no choice in it, then it is not worth anything." She felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. "Do you have a choice?" "Not always," he said, "but sometimes moments like this are enough." A silence hung between them, thick with things unsaid. Then footsteps sounded outside. A voice called her name, "Lady Beatrix." Eleanor turned toward the door. "I must go," she whispered. He nodded. As she slipped outside into the fading daylight, She felt the cold on her skin more sharply than before. But inside her chest, something unfamiliar stirred. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. And as she walked back toward the castle, she knew one thing with certainty. The game around her was shifting, and she, once the quiet piece on the board, might soon learn how to move. By the time Eleanor returned to the main hall, the afternoon light had already faded into a deep gray. The castle's long corridors glowed softly with torchlight, casting long shadows that flickered along the walls. Every step she took echoed slightly, as though the old stones themselves were listening. Lady Beatrix met her near the main stairwell, her face drawn and tense. "There's been a letter," Beatrix whispered, lowering her voice. "From Bereal, brought by a rider who's barely slept. It's sealed in black wax." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Black wax was not used lightly in royal circles. It meant grief, or worse, an accusation. "Does my mother know? She's with the council now." She summoned only the most trusted. No one else was told. Eleanor didn't ask to see the letter. She knew she wouldn't be shown, but she understood what this meant. If Bereal had sent a black-sealed message, it could only mean that Johanna's death wasn't being taken as a tragic accident. It was a message, a sign that someone suspected foul play. And in the world of noble alliances and royal succession, suspicion was often all that was needed to start a war. That evening, the castle buzzed with quiet urgency. Servants moved briskly, speaking in hushed tones. The nobles, still enjoying the last day of the feast, smiled politely, but their eyes were alert. Eleanor could sense the change in mood as clearly as if a bell had been struck. Something was coming. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. She spent that night alone in her chambers, staring at the snow-covered roofs outside her window. The sky was dark and starless, like a curtain pulled tight. She thought of Johanna. She had never met her, but they were the same age. Born to different houses, different lands, but bound by the same rules. Neither had chosen their path, and only one had lived long enough to question it. Eleanor wondered what kind of girl Johanna had been. Had she been afraid? Had she known someone meant her harm? Or had it happened suddenly, without warning? The thought stayed with her like a splinter she couldn't pull out. She knew enough about court to understand that appearances were rarely the full story. There were too many secrets, too many closed doors. And now, Eleanor found herself at the center of a quiet storm. The next morning brought a fresh layer of snow. The castle woke slower, as if weighed down by the news that hadn't yet been spoken aloud. Queen Agnes remained out of sight, locked in meetings that lasted for hours. The council chamber doors stayed shut. Guards stood closer than usual, and their hands hovered near their swords more often. Lady Beatrix didn't send for Eleanor until well after midday. When she arrived, her expression was grave. "You're to attend a private supper tonight," she said. "Not a feast. Just the Queen, Lord Ulrich, and his nephew." "Tristan," Eleanor said softly. "Yes, your presence was requested by name." Eleanor didn't ask who had requested her. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that this dinner was no longer a social formality. It was something else, something deeper, perhaps even a negotiation. She dressed without help that evening. The gown she chose was simple, deep green, with silver embroidery at the sleeves. Her hair she wore down, as her mother had once instructed from moments of diplomacy. "Softness is power," the Queen had said, "even when it feels like weakness." The small dining room was warm and lit with soft candlelight. Queen Agnes sat at the head of the table, flanked by Lord Ulrich and Tristan. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the table was set simply. No fanfare, no court musicians. Eleanor entered silently. She greeted each guest with a gentle nod, and her mother gestured to the empty chair beside her. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. Dinner began with quiet conversation. Lord Ulrich spoke of trade along the northern river routes, of snow early in the season and how it slowed the transport of goods. The Queen responded with comments about drought in the lower valleys and the unrest in two smaller fiefdoms. But Eleanor noticed something else. Tristan said very little. He listened, watched, occasionally offered a word or two, but never more than necessary. His gaze flicked to her only once, but it stayed long enough to feel intentional. Then, halfway through the meal, Ulrich said something that made Eleanor's hand pause mid-motion. "The Northern Court has offered its blessing for a union," he said plainly. "A new marriage pact to reinforce peace in the wake of tragedy." Queen Agnes nodded slowly. "And your king is firm in this offer?" Ulrich gave a small smile. "He believes it would ease uncertainty and provide the North a chance to heal without threats." The queen turned to Eleanor. "And what does my daughter believe?" It was the first time she had been asked in such a setting. Eleanor straightened her back. Her voice didn't tremble. "I believe peace is worth protecting, but not at the cost of honesty." Ulrich raised an eyebrow. "And what is it you fear, Lady Eleanor?" She looked at him, then at Tristan. "That history will repeat itself," she said. There was silence. Then, to her surprise, Tristan spoke. "Then perhaps," he said, "we should speak of what really happened to Johanna." Ulrich turned slightly. "Tristan, no more shadows," the younger man said. "If we are to make a new pact, it should not be built on secrets." Queen Agnes narrowed her eyes. "You believe her death was not an accident?" "I believe it was convenient. For someone." No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Agnes said, "If this marriage is to be considered, my daughter will need more than rumors. She will need truth." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. Tristan looked directly at her. "Then I will find it." That night, Eleanor sat in the chapel long after prayers had ended. She lit a single candle and stared at its flame, trying to steady her thoughts. The quiet inside the stone walls was deep, almost ancient. She thought of the women who had knelt here before her, queens, princesses, brides, mothers. She wondered how many of them had prayed for the strength to endure the lives chosen for them. Outside, snow began falling again. The letter from Berehal, the tension in court, the quiet supper, all of it pointed to something more than politics. Someone had wanted Johanna gone, and now, someone might want Eleanor to take her place. But whether as a bride or a sacrifice, she did not yet know. And as the candle flickered and the cold pressed in, Eleanor realized the walls around her were closing in faster than she had feared. Someone was pulling the strings, and she had only just begun to see how many threads there were. The candle's light shimmered on the chapel's cold stone floor, casting long shadows behind Eleanor as she sat alone, her hands folded loosely in her lap. The air smelled of old incense and damp stone. A draft moved softly through the corridor behind her, whispering like a forgotten voice. She didn't pray that night. Not in the way they taught her to, but she stayed seated in silence, letting her thoughts move slowly, like snow falling outside the stained glass windows. Somewhere in the quiet corners of her mind, she could feel a change pressing in, a shift in the balance. She had grown up in this castle, trained to obey, to accept, to remain still while decisions passed over her like storms. But now, she was beginning to feel something different. Not rebellion, not yet, but awareness. She rose slowly, her legs stiff from sitting too long on the stone bench, and made her way back toward the tower. The halls were nearly empty. Torches flickered low. Only a few guards remained at their posts, and even they looked tired, their eyes half-lidded from long shifts in the cold. As she neared her chamber, she noticed a folded piece of parchment tucked into the frame of her door. No seal, no mark, just a slip of paper barely noticeable. She glanced up and down the corridor. No one was nearby. She slipped it quietly into her sleeve before stepping inside. Cecily was already asleep on the small pallet by the hearth. Eleanor said nothing. She waited until the room was still, then unrolled the paper in the dim light of the fire. 2 words, written in a hand she didn't recognize. The cellar. She stared at the note. It was simple, vague, but she knew it was not a mistake. And she knew, somehow, that it was meant for her. The cellar was a place few nobles visited. It wasn't part of court life, and certainly not a place a royal daughter would be expected to wander. It was used for storage, old records, dried herbs, salted meats, barrels of wine. But Eleanor had only ever been there once, years ago, when she had followed Beatrix down during a winter storm. She slipped on her cloak quietly and waited until Cecily's breathing steadied again. Then she crept from the room. The corridor outside was colder now. She moved quickly but carefully, pulling her hood low. She passed the chapel, its doors now closed tight, and took the side staircase leading downward. Each level dropped further into shadow. By the time she reached the bottom, the torches burned thin and infrequent. The air smelled of dust and damp stone. She paused at the arched doorway of the cellar. It was ajar. Someone had left it open. With cautious fingers, she pushed it wider and stepped inside. The cellar stretched wide beneath the castle, rows of barrels and crates lining both sides, cloaked in dust. The only light came from a single lantern hanging from a hook on the central beam. Eleanor's footsteps were barely audible as she stepped forward. Lady Eleanor. She froze. From behind a row of crates, Tristan stepped into the light. His expression was calm, but his voice was tight, controlled. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure I should," she replied. He glanced around, as if checking again that they were alone. Then he held up a small, folded piece of parchment, one identical to the one she had received. "I left the note. I thought it better to speak away from the eyes of your court and mine." Eleanor studied him, unsure. "What is this?" "I believe someone in this castle knows what happened to Johanna," he said quietly. "And I think we're both being watched more closely than we realize." Eleanor felt her breath hitch. "You think someone here was involved?" "Not directly, but someone knows. And they're afraid of what you might become if you start asking the right questions." She looked down. "I've barely begun to ask any. You've begun more than they expected." He stepped closer, his tone lowering. "There's more. I had word from one of my riders this morning. There were letters between Johanna and a member of your court. Hidden, sent in secret. And one of those letters was never delivered. It vanished before it reached the castle." Eleanor frowned. "Do you know who it was meant for?" "I believe," Tristan said slowly, "it was meant for you." Silence. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "She mentioned a name in the letter my rider retrieved," he added. "Not clearly, but enough. She was warned, told not to trust everyone in her inner circle. She was afraid, but she didn't know who to tell." Eleanor thought of the night she had almost been presented to the northern court, how it had been interrupted by the arrival of that message. How quickly everything had changed. "She died before the match could be made," Eleanor said. "Which means if someone wanted her out of the way, they succeeded. And now, their attention turns to you." A cold breath passed between them. Eleanor pulled her cloak tighter. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Because I don't want to be a pawn either," Tristan said simply. "I was sent to see if a new alliance could be formed. But if that alliance comes from blood and silence, it's not peace. It's just control." She believed him, not because of the words, but because of the way he looked at her, not as something to win, but as someone to warn. "There's more I need to find," he continued. "Letters. Names. I believe Johanna left traces. Maybe even someone loyal to her still remains here. And if we find them, then we find out who really controls the strings in this castle. And maybe we decide whether we're willing to let them keep pulling." Eleanor stood still for a long time, letting the weight of it settle over her. Then she nodded. "I'll help you," she said. "But if we do this, no one else can know." He gave a slight nod. Agreed. They left separately. She returned through the north passage, her footsteps quiet. No one saw her enter her chamber, and Cecily still slept, unaware. Eleanor slipped off her cloak and sat by the fire, staring into the coals. She should have been afraid. She was. But beneath that fear, something else was growing. Purpose. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting. She was choosing. And whatever came next, she would not meet it with silence. Candlelight still trembled in the corners of Eleanor's chamber long after midnight, but sleep never came. She sat near the hearth with her knees drawn to her chest, the hidden letters stitched inside her cloak like a second heartbeat. Every sound in the corridor made her freeze. The silence between footsteps was worse. It felt like the hush before something broke. Cecily had fallen asleep sitting upright, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders and one slipper still on. Eleanor hadn't the heart to wake her. Outside the narrow window, snowflakes floated against a black sky. The storm had returned. Its timing felt cruel, as though even the wind wanted to seal them inside. She rose just before dawn and slipped quietly into the passage behind the east wall. It led through storage rooms and old servant halls long since forgotten. She needed to think without eyes on her, without her mother's watchful silence or Beatrix's warnings echoing in her head. She moved with care, fingers brushing the cool stone, until she reached a shuttered alcove that overlooked the outer courtyard. The view gave her little comfort. Just frozen earth, sleeping trees, and the stables barely lit by a single torch. But the distance helped her think. Ulrich's name in the letters changed everything. He wasn't just pushing for an alliance. He might have been working to control both courts. If Johanna had discovered that, it explained her sudden disappearance. If Queen Agnes had known, it raised even worse questions. Had she remained silent to protect peace? Or to protect herself? The silence had grown too thick to ignore. By mid-morning, the castle seemed to breathe with tension. Rumors spread quickly, though no one said the words aloud. Some said Beatrix had fallen ill. Others whispered she was being questioned privately about old loyalties. No one saw her all day, and her chambers remained locked. Eleanor's gut churned. The woman who had raised her was now being treated like a traitor, and Eleanor knew better than to ask questions too loudly. At the midday council, Queen Agnes sat colder than usual, her crown replaced with a fur-lined veil. She spoke little, nodding as Ulrich delivered news from the border, news that conveniently confirmed the need for quicker union. The council agreed, but when the Queen's eyes met Eleanor's across the room, something flickered there. A silent warning, or maybe a plea. Later that afternoon, Tristan caught her attention in the cloister. He passed her a parchment beneath the hem of her sleeve with barely a glance. She didn't open it until she was alone. It read, "Asterisk Beatrix is in the Eastern Tower. Not under arrest, but not trusted either. Ulrich knows something's missing. He hasn't accused anyone yet. He's waiting to see who panics first. Asterisk." Eleanor's breath caught. Beatrix was still alive, still within reach. But the noose was tightening. They didn't have time to wait for proof to find them. They had to find the rest of it first. She remembered something odd from weeks ago. Just before Johanna was supposed to arrive, a locked drawer in the Solar's writing desk had been found open, and a court scribe had been dismissed without cause. At the time, it was barely a footnote. Now it gnawed at her. She found the scribe that evening, Tomas, now working quietly in the scriptorium as a copyist. His hands still bore ink stains, and he looked thinner, older than she remembered. "I need your help," Eleanor said softly, glancing over her shoulder. "And I need your truth." Tomas blinked up at her, startled. "My lady, I know you were dismissed. I know it was sudden. Was it because you saw something?" He hesitated. "I don't want to hurt you," she said. "But someone is already being punished for keeping secrets. And the next person could be you." Tomas's shoulders slumped. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded paper, yellowed and thin. "I kept a copy," he whispered. "I wasn't supposed to, but it didn't sit right." Eleanor took it, opened it, and read. It was a list. Names, titles, payments. But what caught her attention was a short entry scrawled near the bottom. Gray Boar. Gift accepted. Discretion advised. To be delivered before winter feast. It was dated 1 week before Johanna's death. This ledger was submitted to the Queen's steward, Tomas said. But the steward burned it before final recording. Said it wasn't real, just scribbles. But he was shaking. I think someone was told to remove it before the court ever saw it." Eleanor nodded, her thoughts racing. The ledger proved that Ulrich had accepted something in secret and didn't want it known. But why would the steward protect him unless he feared the Queen too? Eleanor left quickly, tucking the paper into her sleeve. She passed 2 guards near the east wing and heard one mutter something behind her. "She's up late again, like she's got something to hide." She kept walking. That night, when the castle slept, Eleanor returned to the hidden alcove. Tristan joined her this time, his cloak dusted with snow, his breath visible in the cold. She gave him the ledger copy. His hands shook as he read it. "This is enough to force a reckoning," he whispered. "Not yet," Eleanor said. "But it's a start. We have to show the Queen." Eleanor shook her head. "Not unless we know where she stands." They fell silent for a moment, listening to the wind moan through the stones. Then Tristan turned to her. "There's more," he said. "Ulrich's not working alone. He has someone inside your family's household. Someone feeding him updates." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "Who? I don't know yet, but I'll find out." As he slipped away through the corridor, Eleanor stood still, her thoughts spinning. Someone close to her. A maid? A steward? Cecily? No, she pushed that thought away. Not Cecily. But the truth was, she didn't know who to trust anymore. Not entirely. As she made her way back to her room, one thought kept circling her mind. The game was bigger than she'd imagined. It wasn't just about her marriage or her silence. It was about survival. And the castle she'd called home since childhood had become a battlefield made of whispers, masks, and hidden knives. And in the center of it all was a girl who was no longer just a pawn. But she still hadn't figured out how to be a queen. Eleanor barely slept. Her mind kept pacing in the dark, even as her body lay still. The whispers in the hallways, the hidden letters, Beatrix in the Eastern Tower, and now the possibility that someone in her family's household was feeding information to Ulrich. It all tangled around her thoughts like a vine with no end. Every quiet moment felt loaded. Every kind word could be a mask, and every silence might be someone waiting for her to make the wrong move. At breakfast, Queen Agnes looked calm. Too calm. Her eyes didn't search the room like they usually did. Instead, she sat quietly at the high table, sipping tea and answering only when directly addressed. Eleanor watched her carefully, trying to read the space between her words. The queen mentioned the feast for Midwinter's Eve, spoke briefly of preparations, and asked that the musicians be rehearsed in the old hall. None of it mattered, at least not compared to what they both knew lay under the surface. But Agnes never once mentioned Beatrix, not even by name. Tristan wasn't present. His absence gnawed at Eleanor. Had he been discovered? Was he being watched? Or worse, had he been caught with the list from the scribe? She couldn't ask. Not yet. Not with so many eyes on her. Cecily helped her dress that afternoon, brushing out her hair and tightening the laces on a heavy winter gown. Eleanor studied the girl's reflection in the mirror as she worked. Cecily looked tired, paler than usual. "You didn't sleep well?" Eleanor asked softly. Cecily hesitated. "No, my lady. I had a strange dream. A man I didn't know, in the corridor. He kept calling your name." Eleanor turned. "What did he look like?" "Tall. Gray cloak. I didn't recognize his voice. He wasn't one of ours." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "You're sure it was a dream?" Cecily paused. "It felt like one, but I'm not certain." Eleanor said nothing more. But when Cecily left the room, she quickly checked the lining of her cloak to make sure the remaining letters were still there. They were. Unread, untouched. Still, something about the dream unsettled her. Later that evening, a page delivered a message. Queen Agnes wanted Eleanor in the lower library. That was unusual. The queen rarely left the upper chambers. The lower library was quiet, rarely used, filled with old scrolls and crumbling shelves. It wasn't a place for formal talk. It was for secrets. Eleanor walked there with slow, measured steps. The halls were dim, and the snowstorm outside had darkened the windows like curtains pulled tight. She paused at the arched door before entering. Agnes stood by the hearth, staring into the fire. "Close the door," the queen said without turning. Eleanor did. "You've been busy," Agnes said quietly. "More than I allowed." Eleanor froze. The queen finally turned. Her face wasn't angry, but it wasn't kind either. "I know about the letters," she said. Eleanor's mouth went dry. "How? You forget who trained the guards, who built this court. I know the servants who whisper before they realize they're being heard. I know the corridors you think are hidden. Then why call me here?" "Because despite your recklessness," Agnes said, stepping closer, "you're right." Eleanor blinked. "Yes," Agnes continued. "Ulrich took payment from Berehal under false pretenses. He intended to sway both kingdoms, to destabilize the alliance, then rebuild it with himself as a central figure. Johanna found out too late, and when she tried to speak up, she was silenced. The letter she tried to send, yes, it was meant for you." Eleanor's legs felt weak. "You knew." "I suspected," Agnes said. "But suspicions are dangerous when they can't be proven. If I'd acted too soon, Ulrich would have turned the court against me. He's been laying groundwork for years. Why didn't you tell me? Because the fewer people who knew, the safer it was. And because you weren't ready. I am now. Agnes studied her daughter. Perhaps. A pause stretched between them. Beatrix, Eleanor asked. She's safe, the queen said. But I had to separate her. Ulrich grew suspicious. And if I didn't act, he would have. He's watching everyone, Eleanor. I need her back, Eleanor said. I need her near me. She will return when it's safe. Agnes turned back to the fire. There's something you need to understand. Royal women are not protected. We are not guarded. We are used, or we use others. And the only difference between survival and sacrifice is whether we act before the game is played for us. Eleanor stepped closer. Then, teach me. Agnes looked over. Her eyes held both pride and sorrow. You already started learning. I only hope you can finish before it costs you more than your name. That night, Eleanor found a folded ribbon on her bed. Gray, the same shade Cecily described. Her blood turned cold. It hadn't been a dream. Someone had been in the chamber. Someone wanted her to know they could get close. She showed it to no one. Instead, she slipped into the old kitchen tunnels and found the passage to the eastern tower. 2 guards stood nearby, but looked away when she passed. A quiet signal, likely arranged by the queen. Beatrix sat near the tower's hearth, wrapped in a heavy shawl. Her face lit up when she saw Eleanor. My girl, she said, pulling her into a tight embrace. I need you, Eleanor whispered. You always have me. They sat together while Eleanor recounted everything. The dream, the ribbon, the meeting with the queen. Beatrix listened without speaking until the end. You're being marked, she said. Gray ribbon means more than a threat. It's a message. You're now part of their game. They're waiting to see your next move. What do I do? Beatrix reached into her sleeve and pulled out a small medallion. You keep moving. But carefully, Eleanor took it. The symbol on it wasn't familiar. It belonged to Johanna, Beatrix said. She gave it to me weeks before her death. She told me if anything happened, someone loyal to her would recognize it. Who? I don't know. But she said the person worked in the inner court. Someone who sees all, but is never seen. Eleanor looked down at the medallion. A new thread. Another piece in the growing puzzle. As she left the tower and returned through the narrow halls, she felt something shift. Not fear this time. Not confusion. Resolve. The game wasn't over. But for the first time, she wasn't behind. She was catching up. The medallion felt heavier than it should have. Eleanor kept it hidden in the lining of her sleeve, close to her skin. Each time she touched it, a flicker of Johanna's voice echoed in her thoughts. Words she'd never heard but could somehow feel. Warnings left behind. A call for truth that never had the chance to be spoken out loud. The castle felt darker now, not because the walls had changed, but because she was finally seeing them clearly. She walked slower, listened more, watched everything. She began noticing things she hadn't before. Servants who moved in silence, but never made eye contact. Courtiers whose laughter came too quick, too practiced. Letters that arrived sealed, then vanished without reply. The corridors weren't just for walking anymore. They were channels for secrets. And every one of them felt like it was closing in around her. Queen Agnes continued to act as if everything was normal. She hosted court sessions, approved trade requests, and spoke of the coming midwinter feast with calm detachment. But beneath her veil of control, Eleanor saw the flicker of tension in her mother's jaw, the way her hand always lingered on the armrest a little too long after a conversation ended. She wasn't in control. She was holding something back. Maybe a final move. Or maybe fear. Tristan returned to her quietly one evening in the chapel. No greetings, just the sound of boots on stone and the faint scent of snow clinging to his cloak. I know who the traitor is, he whispered. Eleanor looked up sharply. It's the steward, Tristan continued. Rannick. He's been in Ulrich's pocket for months, maybe longer. He's the one who delivered the poison barrel, marked it with a false seal, then told the kitchen staff it came from the southern vineyards. Eleanor's breath caught. And Johanna? He delivered something to her rooms the night before she died. Wine. It was meant to be shared with your family the next morning during the welcome toast. But she drank it early, alone. Eleanor's knees nearly buckled. She wasn't the target, she said slowly. I was. Tristan's silence confirmed it. Rannick thought the wine would be served at the breakfast ceremony, he explained. Ulrich's plan was to take you off the board, quietly, with grief instead of scandal. Then offer his sympathy and power. The air felt too thin. Eleanor's skin prickled. Does my mother know? She suspects, he said. But without evidence, confronting Rannick would mean war. And Ulrich has too many ears in the court. One wrong step. Eleanor nodded. We need something solid. You already have it, Tristan said. That medallion. Johanna gave it to someone for a reason. But I still don't know who. Then find out. Tonight. Before Ulrich makes his next move. He left her in the chapel, footsteps echoing into silence. That night, Eleanor returned to the upper gallery overlooking the great hall, where older courtiers sometimes gathered to escape the formal meals. She wore the medallion around her neck now, tucked beneath her cloak, letting the chain peek out just slightly. It didn't take long. An older man, bent at the shoulders, dressed plainly in servant black, caught sight of the glint and froze. He blinked once, then stood and walked to the corner of the room without a word. She followed. He didn't look at her, only said, She told me it might be you. Who are you? Eleanor asked. I was Johanna's eyes inside the castle. I served the Master of Scrolls. Most forget I'm even there. Eleanor held out the medallion. Did she know she was in danger? She didn't want to believe it, he said. But she saw enough. She made me copy her letters. She kept one final message, never sent. Where is it? The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded parchment, sealed in wax that had cracked with age. He handed it to her. Eleanor didn't open it there. She held it close, then slipped away before anyone else noticed. Back in her chamber, with the door locked and the fire low, she broke the wax seal and read. It was a letter addressed to the Queen. In it, Johanna spoke of the alliance, of Ulrich's private offers, of a threat whispered from a steward whose face she could never quite see. She begged Agnes to delay the match, to investigate before someone was lost. At the bottom was a single line, added in shaky ink. Asterisk, if anything happens to me, it was never meant for me. It was for Eleanor. Asterisk. The words blurred as Eleanor stared at the page. She was supposed to die. The plan had always been to remove her, not Johanna. And now Ulrich was preparing to try again, this time during the midwinter feast. The pieces locked together too neatly. The feast. The sudden pressure to finalize the match. The absence of Beatrix. Even the Queen's silence. It was all part of the final turn. And if she didn't act first, someone else would. The next morning, the castle stirred earlier than usual. Midwinter preparations filled the halls, banners hung, kitchens swarmed with heat and spices, and servants moved like clockwork. But underneath the celebration, something tense hummed in every corner. Guards doubled their patrols. The steward watched Eleanor too closely. And Ulrich smiled more than usual, polite, generous, false. Eleanor met with her mother in the solar, just after noon. Without a word, she placed the letter on the table. Agnes read it slowly, then looked up. You understand what this means? Eleanor nodded. Do you have the strength to do what must come next? Yes, she whispered. The Queen reached in her sleeve and slid over a small glass vial. Then take this. Use it when the time is right. Eleanor didn't ask what was inside. That night, the castle glowed with torchlight and fire. Music floated through the halls, and nobles dressed in silver and sapphire filled the great hall for the feast. Laughter echoed, but beneath every laugh, Eleanor heard the sound of knives sharpening in the dark. The long table was laid with rich meats, winter fruits, steaming bread. Queen Agnes sat at the center. Ulrich to her right, Eleanor across from him. Tristan 2 seats down, silent and tense. Servants poured wine. Toast began. Then the steward approached with a covered tray. Eleanor's heart pounded as he placed it gently before her. Silver lid. No marking. Her eyes locked with his for a split second. And in that moment she saw it. The truth. The final move. The knife hidden in plain sight. She reached for the vial. The room held its breath. And the game, silent, brutal, and centuries old, was ready to end. The feast flickered with golden candlelight and cold tension. like a stage set too perfectly for a scene no one dared admit was coming. Every plate was full, every goblet heavy with spiced wine, every face painted in cheer that didn't quite reach the eyes. But Eleanor's gaze was fixed only on the silver tray before her. The steward stood beside it, hands folded calmly, like a man offering something sacred. Or deadly. She didn't blink, didn't reach for the lid. Instead, she looked across the table to Queen Agnes, who was watching the moment just as carefully, her wine untouched. Tristan, a few seats down, sat forward slightly. A subtle signal. Wait. Watch. Confirm. Lady Eleanor, Ulrich said from across the flame-lit table, his voice smooth and warm like melted wax. You haven't touched your dish. Is the presentation not to your liking? His smile was tight, too polite, too aware. I was only admiring the care, Eleanor said softly. I hear the steward prepared this course himself. The man beside her gave a short bow. It is my honor to serve the court. Her fingers brushed the small vial hidden beneath the fold of her sleeve. She could feel its weight like a stone tied to her wrist. She could use it now, tip a drop into the wine, and offer it to the steward. Watch him flinch, see the truth etched into his face. But no, not yet. Not here. Too many eyes. Too much at risk. One wrong move, and the truth would drown in blood and accusations no one could prove. Instead, she smiled. Then allow me to return the honor. She stood slowly, lifting her goblet in one graceful motion. The hall quieted. Even the music softened behind her. A toast, she said, to peace, to alliance, and to the people who risk everything to protect it, even if they wear no crown. Her eyes held Ulrich's as she said it, and for the first time his smile faltered. She took a sip, just enough to keep the act alive. Then she sat and pushed the silver tray aside, untouched. The steward's hands twitched as he stepped back, barely noticeable, but Eleanor saw it. Later, when the hall began to thin and nobles drifted off to their quarters, Eleanor slipped away through the west corridor. Cecily followed a few paces behind, her eyes scanning for movement. He expected you to eat, the maid whispered. He expected me to die. They reached the chapel side door. Quiet, shadowed, and there, leaning against the stone wall, was Tomas, the former scribe, now Eleanor's most unlikely ally. I copied everything, he whispered, handing her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The original letters, the false records, even the shipment logs from the steward's room. It's all here. Eleanor took the bundle and nodded. Hide. Stay low. We're almost there. As Tomas vanished into the shadows, Eleanor turned back to Cecily. Go wake Beatrix. Tell her to meet me in the solar. We have work to finish. By the time Eleanor reached the solar, the moon was high, casting pale light across the stone floor. She set the bundle on the desk and began sorting the pieces. Letters with Ulrich's seal, maps, duplicated trade receipts. Her hands moved fast but steady. This wasn't a game anymore. It was a case, a trap set over months, years. Beatrix arrived not long after, cloak clutched tight against the cold. I knew this day would come, she said, voice low but certain. We have enough to bring him down, Eleanor said. We just need one final thing. Beatrix raised an eyebrow. Which is? His confession. The older woman blinked. And how do you plan to get that? Eleanor opened the desk drawer and pulled out the medallion, Johanna's symbol, the one that had first marked her as part of this secret war. He thinks I'm just like her, she said. He thinks I'll make the same mistake. Beatrix's jaw tightened. You mean trusting too easily? Eleanor nodded. Beatrix leaned closer. You're sure this is the right way? It's the only way. That night, Eleanor sent a message to Ulrich's chambers. A simple note. Asterisk, we need to speak. Alone. I won't interfere with your plans. I only want to survive them. Asterisk. It was bait, and he took it. An hour later, in the Queen's private study, a place rarely used and full of silence. Eleanor waited by the window as Ulrich entered, cloaked in dark fur, eyes gleaming like a man who thought he had already won. I admit, I didn't expect a private invitation, he said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. Eleanor turned slowly. Then you haven't been watching me closely enough. He chuckled. On the contrary, I've watched you quite well. There it was. The slip. The truth. She kept her face neutral. You wanted me gone. It didn't work. He stepped closer. It wasn't personal. It was strategy. You were a threat. Just like Johanna. She would have ruined everything. And what exactly is everything? A future where both kingdoms are united, under proper leadership. Not bleeding hearts. Not soft queens. His voice sharpened. You wouldn't understand. She stepped closer now. Just a pace between them. Try me. He looked at her, eyes narrowing. You're bold tonight. You try to kill me. I think I'm allowed. Ulrich smiled, a sharp, arrogant thing. And yet here you are, asking to talk. She nodded. Because I want you to admit it. Out loud. Why? So, I know you're not afraid. His voice dropped. I'm never afraid. I do what must be done. For order. For power. There it was. The final piece. Behind the tapestry near the hearth. The hidden passage where Queen Agnes now waited silently with Tristan and Beatrix. Listening. Eleanor didn't flinch. She let the silence stretch. Then she whispered, You'll never be king. Ulrich's hand twitched, but she was already moving. She stepped back, pulled the cord beside the hearth, and the tapestry shifted, revealing the queen. Agnes stepped forward, face carved from stone. Ulrich's expression shattered. You, he breathed. Yes, she said calmly. And I heard every word. Guards entered next. Quiet. Swift. Ulrich didn't fight. Not at first. But his eyes were wild. You'll destroy the alliance. You'll tear it all down. Agnes raised a hand. You already did. As I led him away, Eleanor finally let herself breathe. It was not victory yet, but it was the first true blow struck on her terms. She turned to her mother. We're not safe yet, she said. No, Agnes replied. But for the first time in years, we're closer. Outside, snow still fell. Quiet. Relentless. Covering the castle in white silence. But beneath it, the truth had been uncovered. And the game, long hidden in shadow, was finally truly exposed. The castle didn't breathe easier after Ulrich was taken. If anything, it grew more tense. The silence felt heavier, the halls colder, and the faces more unreadable. Eleanor thought removing him would bring relief, maybe even safety. But something didn't settle right. It was in the way the guards looked over their shoulders when they passed the queen's chambers. In the way the steward's replacement, a pale man named Merrick, never made eye contact. And most of all, it was in the way Queen Agnes didn't celebrate. She was calm, poised, but never at ease, like someone waiting for a shadow to return. 3 days passed with no official announcement. Ulrich remained locked in the lower tower. The court speculated, but no one spoke the truth aloud. Rumors floated like ash. Some said he had confessed. Others whispered he had gone mad. Eleanor watched the courtiers with sharper eyes now. She didn't miss the ones who used to cling to Ulrich's every word and now pretended they'd never met him. But one figure didn't change. Lord Grell, an old noble from the western province, always quiet, always neutral. She noticed him whispering with Merrick. Twice. She made note of it. That night, while preparing for sleep, Cecily slipped into her room with a strange look on her face. She held out a folded parchment. This was left under the linens in the laundry. No name, just left. Eleanor took it carefully. The handwriting was unfamiliar, a rushed scrawl. Asterisk, you think it's over. It isn't. Ulrich wasn't working alone. The true hand still moves. Watch the queen, asterisk. Her heart dropped. She read it again, slower, then folded it and hid it beneath the mattress. Someone was playing both sides, either to keep the chaos alive or to destroy them from within. The next morning, Queen Agnes summoned her earlier than usual. Eleanor dressed in silence, her thoughts churning. As she entered the solar, she saw her mother standing near the window, pale hands gripping the edge of the sill. Agnes turned, her voice quiet. Ulrich was found dead in his cell. Eleanor stared at her. What? Poisoned. Sometime during the night. Eleanor's mouth went dry. How? Who had access? Agnes shook her head. Only the guards. And Merrick, who brought his meals. The same steward Eleanor had seen with Lord Grell. It was supposed to be justice, Agnes said, almost to herself. Now it will look like revenge. Or fear. Eleanor stepped closer. It wasn't you. Agnes didn't answer. She didn't need to. And Eleanor realized something terrible. If someone killed Ulrich, it wasn't to stop his crimes. It was to stop his confession. He'd become a liability. Someone was tying up loose ends. That night, Eleanor called for Tristan and Beatrix. They met in the chapel's shadowed corner, where no echo reached the stone ceiling. He was silenced. Tristan said, "There's no other reason." "Which means there's still someone else," Beatrix added. "And they're closer than we think." Eleanor pulled the parchment from her cloak, the warning left under the linens. She handed it to Beatrix. "This was left for me. Whoever wrote it knows something. They want us to turn on the queen." Tristan frowned. "Or they want to distract us while they move again." Beatrix looked between them. "We need proof, not suspicion." Eleanor nodded. "Then we start watching everyone, especially Merrick and Lord Grell." They agreed to spread out, stay quiet, and gather information before the feast in 3 days' time. But the next morning brought a new surprise. The Southern King sent an urgent message. A royal envoy was en route, days earlier than expected, to finalize the marriage treaty. No delay, no negotiation. Eleanor read the message in the great hall with clenched teeth. The envoy would arrive just in time for the feast. They'd expect unity, celebration, trust, and yet everything inside these walls was breaking. As the court began its frantic preparations for the envoy's arrival, Eleanor wandered into the garden cloister. Snow lay untouched across the hedges. She needed air, space, time to think, but she wasn't alone. Lord Grell stood by the fountain, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't look surprised to see her. "You're walking in the cold," he said. "I needed quiet," she replied, careful. He nodded slowly. "Cold clears the mind." She stepped closer. "I saw you speaking with Merrick." Grell didn't deny it. "He's new," Eleanor said. "But you've always been here." "I have," he agreed. "Watching, waiting, listening." "For what?" "For the moment someone finally paid attention." Eleanor blinked. "To what?" Grell turned fully toward her. "To the real reason your kingdom's been teetering on the edge of ruin." She stared at him. "You're the one behind the letter." "I wrote it," he said. "But I'm not the threat. I'm the one trying to stop what's coming." "What is coming?" He stepped closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. Ulrich was a distraction, a loud man with big threats. But the real game has always been in the quiet. Someone close to the queen, closer than you'd ever imagine. And they've been planning this since before Johanna ever crossed your border. Eleanor's pulse quickened. "You have proof." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not yet, but you do." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the corridor before she could ask more. She stood frozen in the snow, her breath misting in the cold. The story wasn't over. Not even close. Ulrich had been a mask, and now the real face was beginning to show. Eleanor returned to her chambers with Lord Grell's words clanging through her head like a warning bell she couldn't silence. The real game has always been in the quiet. The thought wrapped itself around everything she had known so far. Ulrich, the poison wine, the letters, Johanna's death. It had all seemed like a single tangled knot. But now she was starting to see it differently. Ulrich wasn't the mastermind. He'd been a front, a force loud enough to draw attention away from the one who never spoke too much, never stood out, and never left a trace. She sat by the hearth long after the fire had died down, the sky outside turning a soft steel gray with the approach of dawn. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of Johanna's medallion, its weight now heavier than ever. The person behind everything wasn't done yet. In fact, they were just beginning. And the envoy's arrival tomorrow meant the trap would be sprung during the most vulnerable moment, when all eyes were turned towards ceremony, when all defenses were lowered in the name of peace. By the time Cecily came in with hot water and tea, Eleanor had already made up her mind. "I need you to do something," she said softly. Cecily paused, sensing the gravity in Eleanor's voice. "Anything, my lady. I need you to follow Merrick. Discreetly. Don't let anyone see you. Don't approach him. Just observe where he goes, who he speaks to, and if he ever doubles back to look behind him." Cecily nodded once, firmly, then disappeared without a sound. Tristan and Beatrix arrived shortly after. Eleanor had sent them urgent summonses, coded and sealed. The three of them gathered in the old reading room beside the scriptorium, one of the few places left in the castle where no one lingered for long. "There's another player," Eleanor began. "Lord Grell admitted to writing the warning, and he believes someone else has been manipulating everything, even Ulrich." Beatrix frowned. "Grell's clever, but he's not always honest." "True," Eleanor said. "But what if he's right this time? What if we've been focused on the wrong enemy?" Tristan leaned forward. "Then we need to think about who would benefit the most from this alliance falling apart, and who would benefit if it succeeded on their terms." Eleanor nodded. "Ulrich wanted control, but someone wanted chaos. Someone wanted us afraid, divided, suspicious. Poison is clean, silent. A whisper in the right ear can break a kingdom faster than any sword." "And if the envoy arrives tomorrow," Beatrix added, "that would be the perfect time for this final piece to fall into place." They sat in tense silence, the fire crackling beside them. "We'll watch Merrick," Tristan said, "and Grell. But we also need to watch the Queen." Eleanor looked up sharply. "You think she might?" "I don't know," Tristan admitted. "But if someone's truly close to her, close enough to plant whispers or false trust, we have to consider every possibility." Beatrix hesitated. "There is someone, the Queen's personal handmaid, Rhea." Eleanor blinked. "She's been with her since before I was born." "Exactly," Beatrix said. "And yet you've never spoken with her at length, have you?" Eleanor tried to recall. Rhea had always been in the background, calm, silent, dependable. The perfect person to overlook. That realization chilled her. "We watch her too," Eleanor whispered. "We watch everyone." That evening, the castle was a blur of silk and polish. Servants hurried with candles. The kitchen steamed with preparation, and the great hall was filled with workers hanging banners bearing the crests of both kingdoms. But Eleanor saw none of it. She stood in the upper corridor, looking down into the main hall with sharp, searching eyes. Then she spotted it. Merrick, slipping out through the side door beneath the stairwell. Cecily was already in motion behind him, quiet as snowfall. Eleanor didn't follow. Not yet. She turned back toward the Queen's wing and walked straight into Rhea, who was exiting Agnes's private chamber with a folded cloth bundle. "Oh," Rhea said, startled. "My lady." Eleanor forced a gentle smile. "Busy day. It always is before a feast." Eleanor's eyes flicked to the bundle. "Shall I carry that for you?" Rhea's grip tightened slightly. "That's kind, but no need. It's just stitching for the Queen's table drape." She curtsied and turned to leave. But something in her pace changed just slightly. Faster. Controlled. Eleanor waited for the corner, then followed. She saw Rhea slip through a narrow door near the linen storage, not used by anyone outside the Queen's staff. Eleanor waited, heart pounding, then opened the door a crack. What she saw stole the air from her lungs. Rhea stood before a small chest, hidden beneath an old table. Inside it, stacks of folded letters, pressed wax seals, and a small vial of clear liquid in a velvet pouch. The same kind of vial Eleanor had once been handed by the Queen. Before Eleanor could react, Rhea turned, eyes wide. "How long have you been there?" she asked, voice calm but sharp. "Long enough," Eleanor replied. They stood frozen, one step between them. "You've been feeding Ulrich," Eleanor said. "All this time." "Not the Queen. You." Rhea tilted her head. "I was protecting the realm." "No," Eleanor said. "You were protecting your own game." "I did what had to be done," Rhea said. "Ulrich was reckless, but useful. The Queen was indecisive. You were naive." Eleanor's hand curled at her side. "So you poisoned Johanna." Rhea didn't flinch. She wanted to delay the alliance. That would have cost us everything. Eleanor felt the heat rush to her face. "You used my mother's silence. You built a story around a threat you invented." "The realm needs order," Rhea said. "And I gave it that." She moved suddenly, just an inch, but Eleanor stepped back and slammed the door shut, then ran. She didn't stop until she reached the Queen's chambers. Agnes was seated by the hearth, a letter in her hands. She looked up, startled. "It's Rhea," Eleanor gasped. "She's the one. Not Ulrich. Not just him. She's behind it all." The Queen didn't blink. I know, she said. Eleanor stared at her. What? I've known for months, Agnes said. But she's too protected, too careful. I needed her to make a mistake. I needed her to think no one suspected. You let her keep running the court? I had no choice, Agnes said. But now, if you saw it, if you confronted her, she has the vial, Eleanor said. And letters. Agnes stood, her face tightening with resolve. Then we move now, tonight. As they left the room together, the torches flickering around them, Eleanor felt a new truth settle in her chest. This had never been just about marriage or survival. This had been a war fought by women, silently, patiently, for control of a world that never looked close enough to see their hands shaping it. And now, at last, someone was watching. They moved through the halls without a word. Eleanor and Queen Agnes, their steps silent, but full of purpose. The castle had become a maze of shifting loyalties and shadows, and every wall felt like it was listening. A sharp wind howled outside, rattling the old glass panes, and the flame of each passing torch flickered as though nervous. But they kept moving toward the hidden corridor behind the scriptorium, where Beatrix and Tristan were already waiting. Beatrix's eyes sharpened as she saw them approach. You found her, didn't you? Eleanor nodded. She has the letters. The poison. She admitted it. Said it was for the good of the realm. Agnes stepped forward. Then the good of the realm demands truth. Tristan reached inside his cloak and pulled out a small scroll. We have proof she met with emissaries from Berehal under a false identity 3 weeks before Johanna's death. She wasn't acting alone. She was selling our position to outside forces. And they paid handsomely. Eleanor took the scroll and added it to the evidence bundle she'd started days ago. It was getting thicker, heavier, more damning. Beatrix crossed her arms. We'll have one shot. At the feast, with everyone present. We confront her publicly with proof. There'll be no room to maneuver, no space to deny. She'll be surrounded. Agnes nodded, but her jaw was tense. She's too clever to underestimate. If she suspects even a hint of what we plan, she'll vanish. Or worse, strike first. Eleanor met her mother's eyes. Then we act before she does. All the next day, the castle moved like a living stage being dressed for performance. Bright banners in gold and crimson fluttered from the towers, and the scent of roasted meat, cloves, and honey filled every hall. The royal envoy from the southern kingdom arrived just past midday. 5 riders cloaked in white and silver, flanked by banners and carrying ornate scrolls sealed in wax. The feast would begin at sundown, and a marriage treaty would be signed by firelight, with both kingdoms watching. Eleanor wore a simple gown that night, deep navy blue, unadorned except for a silver clasp that bore Johanna's medallion. Her hair was pulled back, her hands bare, her heart steeled. As guests filed into the great hall, Rhea moved calmly through the crowd, as she always had. She placed wine goblets with care, adjusted silverware with a soft smile, and bowed in practiced silence as nobles passed her by. No one questioned her presence. No one truly saw her, except Eleanor. She watched every step Rhea took, every glance. And when the queen arrived, followed closely by Beatrix and Tristan, they exchanged a small, subtle nod. The hall dimmed as the final torches were lit. A hush fell. Queen Agnes stood. We gather tonight not just in celebration, but in commitment to peace, to trust, and to truth. As the crowd applauded politely, Agnes raised her hand. Before we move to ceremony, there is something I must address. The room quieted, unsure. Agnes turned slightly, gesturing to Eleanor. My daughter has uncovered a thread of betrayal that touches not just this castle, but the future of both our kingdoms. Gasps, murmurs. All eyes turned to Eleanor. She stepped forward, heart pounding in her chest. The person responsible for poisoning Princess Johanna, she said slowly, clearly, was not Ulrich. He may have been complicit, but the hand that moved the cup was someone else's. The hall fell in a stunned silence. It was Rhea, Eleanor said. The queen's handmaid. Rhea, standing beside the wine table, didn't move. Eleanor held up a scroll. We have documents, proof she was meeting with foreign agents. Letters forged under royal seal. A vial, identical to the one Johanna drank from, hidden in her quarters. And she confessed. Still, Rhea said nothing. No denial. No retreat. Just one slow turn of her head. "You waited too long," she said softly, and suddenly the air changed. Rhea reached beneath the wine table. A small blade gleamed in her hand. Too fast to shout, too fast to stop. But Tristan was faster. He tackled her before the knife left her hand, knocking over the table, sending goblets crashing and wine spilling across the stone floor like blood. Guards swarmed in, and Rhea was wrestled to the ground, her calm finally cracking into rage. "I did it for the realm," she screamed. "You sit in your towers playing queens and heirs while everything rots below you. I gave this kingdom strength." Agnes stepped forward slowly, her voice firm and quiet. "You gave it fear. You gave it silence." Rhea fought against the guards, eyes blazing. "You think removing me will save you? The rot is deeper than one handmaid. I was not alone." Those last words hit harder than any blade. Because Eleanor knew she was telling the truth. After the chaos settled, after Rhea had been dragged to the tower in chains, and after the guests had been escorted out in a swirl of confusion, Queen Agnes locked the doors to her chambers and stared into the fire for a long time. She wasn't lying, she finally said. "There's more." Eleanor sat beside her. "Then we keep digging. We don't stop now." Tristan entered moments later with a quiet knock. "The envoy is shaken, but they'll stay. The marriage treaty's still on the table, but they're watching us closely now." Eleanor looked to her mother. "Can we still go through with it?" Agnes hesitated. "It depends. On who else we find. On who else was working with Rhea." Beatrix joined them, face grim. "We've uncovered one layer, but there's more beneath it. And now that we've drawn them out, they'll move faster. Strike harder." Eleanor stood and walked to the window. Snow was falling again, slow and steady. Everything looked so quiet from up here. Peaceful even, but she knew the truth. There was another hand moving behind the scenes. Another piece on the board, hidden in plain sight. And if Rhea was only the beginning, then the end would be far more dangerous than they ever imagined. Snow kept falling through the night, blanketing the castle rooftops and muffling the world in silence. But inside the stone walls, everything felt louder than ever. Eleanor sat awake in her chamber, candles burning low, the heat barely touching the chill that clung to her skin. Her thoughts raced, her breath shallow. They had exposed Rhea, uncovered her plans. But the last thing she'd screamed before being dragged away kept echoing in Eleanor's mind. Asterisk, I was not alone. Asterisk. Those 4 words carried more weight than anything she'd heard so far. And the way Queen Agnes had gone quiet after didn't help. They both knew it wasn't over. Someone else had been working in the shadows. Someone even closer. But who? At dawn, Tristan knocked softly on her door. He didn't speak at first, just handed her a folded letter. "It was found in Marek's quarters," he said. Eleanor unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a message written in a different language, one only a few in the royal court could read. But she recognized the seal. It was the same as the one she'd seen on foreign documents months ago, an agent from Bedtime, the very kingdom that was now pushing the treaty with such urgency. "This wasn't about marriage," she whispered. "It was about takeover." Tristan nodded. Rhea was the inside hand, yes. But this is wider. They planned to destabilize the court, then use the treaty as the final thread. Once signed, they'd have claimed not just through marriage, but through control of trade routes, military support, and succession lines. Eleanor stared at the letter. So Ulrich was a tool, a way to stir chaos. And once he outlived his use, he was removed. Beatrix entered behind him, carrying another scroll. "And this," she said, "is the final piece." It was a list of names. Hidden among them were 2 council members, 3 highborn merchants, and one of the castle's own guards. People who had sworn loyalty to the crown, but were taking secret payments from Bedtime. The web had been woven tighter than anyone had imagined. "They're all attending the treaty ceremony tonight," Beatrix said, waiting to witness the final signature. Eleanor looked between them. "Then we give them a ceremony they won't forget." That evening, the great hall was lit brighter than ever. Gold cloth hung from the walls, and the southern envoy stood proud at the center, surrounded by his advisors, each one dressed in soft gray and silver. They smiled politely, But beneath the smiles was tension, calculated, expectant. Queen Agnes entered with Eleanor by her side. The treaty scroll was brought forward. The envoy stepped up, ready to make history. Eleanor didn't move. She looked across the crowd, her voice calm but firm. "Before we proceed, I have a question for the envoy." The man paused, puzzled. "Of course. Tell me," she said, "why was this letter?" She held up the scroll found in Marek's quarters, delivered to one of our staff by your men. "And why does it bear instructions to secure control over our military transport lines before the spring thaw?" The room froze. The envoy's face tightened. "I don't know what you're referring to." Eleanor walked forward, holding up another list. "And why are these names, all of them tied to your treasury, also listed on payment records found inside our own walls?" Murmurs rippled through the court. The council members listed began shifting in their seats. One of them stood to leave, but guards blocked the door. Queen Agnes stepped forward. This treaty was not a path to peace. It was a tool for silent conquest, and we will not sign away our kingdom under the pretense of alliance. The envoy's mask fell. His face hardened. "You'll regret this," he said. "I already have," the queen replied. Guards moved in, detaining the known traitors. Some resisted, but most simply hung their heads, the weight of exposure too much to bear. The envoy stormed out, his men following, but the damage had been done. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt the air shift. The storm had passed, or so she thought. Later that night, as the castle quieted and the guards returned to their posts, Eleanor walked alone to the library. She needed space, quiet, a moment to breathe. But she wasn't alone. As she turned the corner into the reading chamber, she froze. Sitting by the hearth was Lord Grell. "I thought you left," she said. "I did," he replied. "But I had one last thing to do." He stood slowly and pulled something from his cloak, a journal bound in worn leather. Eleanor took it, flipping through the pages. It was Johanna's, her private writings. Dates, names, suspicions. Everything she had known. "She gave this to me the night before she died," Grell said. "Told me to keep it hidden. Said the truth would be too much to handle unless someone strong enough found it." Eleanor looked up at him, heart pounding. "You knew all of this whole time?" He nodded. "I did, but I wasn't sure who could be trusted. Until now." She flipped to the last page. A single line written in Johanna's hand. Asterisk, "Not all queens are born. Some are made in fire and fear and truth." Asterisk. Eleanor closed the book. The castle would never be the same again, nor would she. But in that moment, with snow falling outside and the fire glowing low, she knew something deeper had taken root. They had tried to silence her, use her, break her, but all they'd done was forge her. The castle felt different now. Not quieter, because courtiers still whispered and guards still patrolled, but clearer, as if some weight had finally been lifted, even though Eleanor knew a heavier one had just been placed on her shoulders. She stood in the highest tower that night, wind tugging at her cloak, staring out across the snow-covered hills that stretched endlessly beyond the kingdom's borders. The alliance had been shattered, the traitors exposed, and the final threads of Johanna's warnings had been brought into the light. But peace didn't feel like peace. Not yet. Behind her, Queen Agnes stepped out of the stairwell, her steps soft, deliberate. She didn't speak at first, only came to stand beside Eleanor. They watched the snow together, both thinking of all that had been lost and all that hadn't yet been saved. "We've weathered worse winters," the queen said at last. "Not like this," Eleanor replied. "No," Agnes agreed. "This one was colder." Eleanor turned slightly toward her. "Do you regret it? The silence? The waiting?" Agnes's lips pressed into a faint line. "Every day. But power isn't won by shouting. It's kept by patience. I thought I was protecting you by keeping the truth buried, but you uncovered it anyway." "I didn't want to," Eleanor said, "but Johanna made sure I couldn't ignore it." Agnes nodded slowly. She always had a gift for inconvenient truths. They stood in silence again, until the bells tolled the hour from the chapel below. Agnes turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, the council will try to rewrite what happened. They'll downplay the betrayal, push for trade to resume. They'll ask you to smile and pretend none of it scarred you. Eleanor met her gaze. And what should I do? The queen didn't answer directly. Just remember, this kingdom doesn't need another pretty smile. It needs a spine. Eleanor stayed in the tower long after her mother left. She watched the stars drift behind clouds and thought of Johanna's journal, now locked safely in her desk. Of Rhea, still imprisoned in the tower below. Of Grell, who'd vanished again after delivering the truth. He was a man of shadows. She doubted she'd ever see him again. The next morning came hard and gray. Eleanor barely slept, but she dressed carefully. Simple gown, hair tied back, the medallion resting over her chest like armor. The council meeting had been moved to the lower chamber, one with no windows and no warmth. A clever choice. It made people uncomfortable. She entered alone. The room quieted instantly. Duke Auric, now nervously occupying the seat once belonging to one of the exposed traitors, cleared his throat. Lady Eleanor, we thank you for your diligence in recent matters. However, we must consider the long-term effects of last night's disruption. Disruption? Eleanor asked. You mean the attempted betrayal of our entire kingdom? He flinched. Yes, of course, but still, there are diplomatic consequences. Trade routes. Reputations. Reputations, she repeated, will recover. Broken kingdoms don't. There are nods. Hesitation. People testing the wind. Another counselor, Lady Miriam, leaned forward. With the southern envoy gone and the marriage treaty off the table, there will be pressure to form another alliance. Quickly, let them try, Eleanor said. But this time we look deeper. No more closed doors. No more private arrangements made in the dark. Agnes entered then, slowly, quietly, and took her seat. She said nothing. She didn't need to. She looked at Eleanor with eyes that had seen too many wars and gave a subtle nod. Eleanor stood taller. We rebuild, she said to the council. Not by rushing into another false peace, but by securing the one we've already fought for. We expose what's been hidden. We clean out what's rotted. And when the people ask who they can trust, this room should be the answer. The chamber stayed silent for a long beat. Then Lady Miriam said quietly, Then perhaps it's time we formally discuss what many of us have already begun to whisper. Eleanor turned toward her. The people need a symbol of stability, Miriam continued. Someone who not only survived the storm, but stood against it. Someone who listens, fights, and leads. Eleanor didn't speak. We wish to recommend, Miriam went on, that the title of Crown Princess be officially transferred to Lady Eleanor. Immediately, gasps, a few hushed murmurs, but no one objected. Agnes sat very still, eyes fixed on her daughter. The weight of the moment pressed in around her like frost. This was what the fight had come to. Not survival, not revenge, but purpose. Eleanor inhaled slowly. I accept, she said. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the royal gardens where Johanna once laughed beside the fountains, Eleanor found herself thinking not of titles or ceremonies, but of the final entry in that journal. The part no one else had seen. One line, scribbled hastily, as if Johanna had known her time was running out. Asterisk if they come for me. It's because they fear what I saw. If they come for Eleanor, it's because they fear what she'll become. Asterisk. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment and let that settle deep in her chest. But just as she turned to leave the garden, a servant came running up to her, out of breath. My lady, there's something you should see. He led her down into the cellar storage rooms, where wine casks lined the walls and damp air clung to the stone. There, wedged between barrels, was a leather satchel no one had touched in months. Dusty, forgotten. Inside were more letters. Dozens, all marked with Johanna's handwriting. And among them, one addressed to a name Eleanor didn't recognize. To Leora. She opened it slowly. The words inside were cryptic, vague. A letter meant for someone who already knew what it referred to. Asterisk, the stones are still moving. Even if I fall, she will rise. Protect her. And if the shadow returns, finish what we couldn't. Asterisk. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and looked at the servant. Where did you find this? It was hidden in a broken panel behind the casks. We almost missed it. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. If Johanna had been writing to someone else, someone still out there, then that meant the network of resistance, of secret watchers and protectors, hadn't died with her. It was still alive, somewhere. And if Johanna had planned for this even before her death, then there was still one final piece left on the board. Eleanor rose, eyes steady. The war in the shadows wasn't over. But now it had a new leader. And this time, the darkness would not win. Eleanor stepped out of the cellar with the satchel clutched tight under her arm, her mind racing faster than her footsteps. The snow outside had softened to a quiet mist, but inside her chest, something had ignited again. Just when she thought the final thread had been tied, Johanna's hidden letter unraveled it all, quietly, carefully, and with a name she'd never heard. Leora. She returned to her chamber, locking the door behind her. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old parchment, grounding her as she sat at the desk and began spreading out the letters. Most were brief, written in Johanna's sharp, slanted script, notes, warnings, suspicions. They outlined movements across regions, inconsistencies in court records, and veiled messages about the Berehal emissaries long before the formal treaty had even been discussed. Johanna had seen it coming piece by piece and had documented it all. But what unsettled Eleanor most was the tone of the letter to Leora. It was personal, urgent, almost protective. Whoever Leora was, Johanna trusted her deeply, enough to place her hopes in her if Eleanor failed. And now Eleanor had to know who she was. The next morning, after a restless night, she asked Beatrix to meet her in the small cloister library just before sunrise. Beatrix arrived in full cloak, rubbing her hands together to fight off the morning chill. "You're up early," she said, "or you never want to sleep." Eleanor slid the letter across the table. "Do you know this name?" "Leora." Beatrix squinted at the script, her brow furrowing. "It sounds familiar. Old. Maybe a servant." "I thought so too." But Johanna trusted her. She wrote like Leora was part of something bigger. She says, asterisk, the stones are still moving. Asterisk, does that mean anything to you? Beatrix sat slowly, her expression changing. That phrase, it's not just poetic. It was once the motto of an old group of informants loyal to the crown. Centuries ago, they were known as the Silent Stones. Their purpose was to protect the realm by any means necessary. Spies, scribes, servants who gathered truths others buried. They were disbanded long before your time. But Johanna revived them, Eleanor whispered. Or tried to, Beatrix said. If Leora was part of that, then she's more than just a name. Eleanor stood, her decision already made. "We find her." Beatrix nodded. "I'll speak to the staff." Quietly. For days, Eleanor walked the halls differently. She greeted the same people, passed the same tapestries, answered the same courtiers with the same practiced grace, but she listened more carefully now. To footsteps, to tone, to who moved through the halls when no one was watching. Merrick had vanished after the failed treaty, and though Rhea remained imprisoned, not a word had escaped her since her arrest. But late one evening, as Eleanor passed through the east hallway toward the kitchens, she spotted an old woman hunched near the storage door, wrapping herbs in cloth. Her hair was white, her eyes steady. Something about her seemed still. "Your name," Eleanor said gently, "isn't Leora by any chance?" The woman looked up with eyes as sharp as frost. She didn't answer. Not immediately. Then, with a faint smile, she said, "I was wondering how long it would take." Eleanor stepped closer. "You knew Johanna." "I raised her," Leora said simply. "But more than that, I trained her." Eleanor's breath caught. "You were one of them. The Silent Stones." "I still am," she said. "We never stopped. We just went underground." Eleanor felt the gravity of the moment settle into her bones. "Why didn't you come forward?" Leora's smile faded. "Because you weren't ready." "Not yet." "Am I now?" Leora studied her for a long, quiet second. "Yes." That night, Leora brought her to a hidden chamber beneath the old stables, one that hadn't been used in decades. The walls were lined with old maps, coded ledgers, and secret messages written in cipher. 3 others waited there, men and women Eleanor barely recognized from the castle, all of them living quietly, invisibly, waiting for a queen brave enough to see them. Leora placed Johanna's letters on the table and unfolded a large parchment, a map with red ink circling various points across the border. This is what Johanna was building. A warning system, a web of eyes and ears to keep the kingdom from falling into the hands of false friends. But she didn't live to finish it. Eleanor looked down at the map and saw just how vulnerable her kingdom truly was. Leora leaned in. You've exposed the players inside the court. But there are others, waiting, watching. The failed treaty didn't end the threat, it delayed it. Berethel's king won't stop now. He'll try again. Different envoy, different tactic, maybe even through one of your allies. Eleanor nodded, absorbing every word. Then we finish what Johanna started, she said. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor moved between her royal duties and the hidden chamber like a woman living two lives. To the court, she was crowned princess, graceful, poised, a symbol of new beginnings. But beneath the surface, she became the architect of a secret force. Leora taught her codes. One of the former scribes, a quiet boy named Micah, taught her how to use wax markers that left no trace. Beatrix helped identify which council members could be trusted and which ones needed watching. And through it all, Queen Agnes said nothing. Until one morning, as Eleanor prepared to leave her chamber, the queen was waiting by the door. You've been busy, she said. Eleanor didn't deny it. Agnes stepped inside. I know what you're building. I've seen it before, but I never had the nerve to do it myself. Eleanor waited. I stayed silent too long, Agnes continued. So now, if you're ready to lead, not just with title, but with vision, I'll give you everything I didn't have. She handed Eleanor a small wooden box. Inside were 5 wax seals, old, royal, powerful. With these, the queen said, you can write your own law. It was the final key. That night, Eleanor stood before the inner circle of the silent stones, the seals before her, the map open. We rebuild the shield Johanna began, she said. We widen it, sharpen it. Our kingdom won't just survive the next storm. It will see it coming. But just as the meeting ended and the candles were being snuffed out, Leora pulled Eleanor aside. There's one last thing, she said, her voice low. She handed her a crumpled page torn from the back of Johanna's journal. It was a list. Names. Places. One circled twice in bold ink. North Hall. Eleanor frowned. What's North Hall? Leora looked uneasy. It was a stronghold. Once loyal. But it's gone dark. No riders in weeks. No messages. And Johanna had been investigating it right before she died. Eleanor stared at the name. Do you think that's where the real enemy is? I think, Leora said, that's where the next war begins. Eleanor said nothing. But deep in her chest, she knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much, much larger. Eleanor rode out before dawn, the frost still clinging to the grass and the breath of her horse rising in soft clouds. North Hall lay 2 days north of the capital, near the edge of the old forests, once a loyal outpost and royal estate, now eerily silent. No messenger had returned from it in weeks. No goods, no answers, and Johanna had marked it with urgency, circled it in ink, as if she knew something terrible had taken root there. Eleanor wasn't going to wait for that root to grow deeper. She took only a small escort. Tristan, Beatrix, 2 guards sworn to her alone, and Leora. No trumpets, no banners, just quiet travel under the veil of fog. They didn't speak much on the first day, each of them wrapped in their own thoughts. Even Beatrix, usually the first to fill silence with wit, kept to herself. Eleanor knew why. They'd all felt it. This wasn't just a mission of curiosity. It was a warning Johanna had buried in layers, and they were only now brave enough to follow it. By the second night, they reached the wooded hills near North Hall. From a ridge above, Eleanor saw the silhouette of the old estate. But something was off. There should be light, Tristan muttered. Torches, smoke, movement, but there was none. The windows of the manor were black. The outer walls had moss creeping up their sides. The stables were still, and not even the wind made the banners move. The place looked abandoned, but not like it had been for long. More like someone had snuffed it out in one quiet, sweeping motion. "We go in at first light," Eleanor said. They camped in silence, the fire kept low. No one slept deeply. At sunrise, they approached the main gates. The wood was warped, the iron hinges rusted. Leora frowned. This place shouldn't look this forgotten. It was active just months ago. Eleanor dismounted and pushed the gate open. It creaked like a warning. Inside the courtyard, signs of sudden departure were everywhere. A bucket overturned, a cart left mid-load, a door hanging open as if someone had fled. But no blood, no bodies, just emptiness. They split up. Tristan and Beatrix searched the outer buildings. The guards checked the stables. Leora and Eleanor climbed the stone steps into the manor house. It was colder inside than it was outside. The air felt heavy, stale. In the great hall, Eleanor saw it. A table set for dinner. Half-eaten bread, dried stew in bowls, a broken goblet lying on the floor. "They left in a hurry," Leora whispered. "But why?" Eleanor spotted something on the far wall, a message scratched into the wood with a blade. "They watched us from within. We ran too late. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk." Eleanor stepped back, chills crawling up her spine. "Who's they?" Leora didn't answer. In the back of the hall, behind a hanging tapestry, they found a stairway leading down. The steps were narrow and curved, leading into darkness. "We need light," Eleanor said. With a torch lit, they descended slowly. The air smelled damp and earthy. Below, the corridor opened into what had once been a wine cellar, but was now something else. Maps, weapons, scrolls, seals, a hidden war room. "They were building something," Leora said, running her hand along the wall where an old map of the realm was pinned with tiny iron nails. Dozens of locations were marked, some with red dots, others with black lines connecting them. But building it for whom? Eleanor asked. At that moment, Tristan's voice echoed from above. "Come quick!" Eleanor and Leora raced back up and out into the courtyard, where the others had gathered around the well. Beatrix was kneeling, staring into it. "There's something down there. A body." The guards lowered a rope and hauled up what they found. Wrapped in wool and soaked to the bone, the figure was limp but not long dead. When they pulled back the cloak from the man's face, Leora gasped. "That's Aiden. He was one of Johanna's runners." Eleanor stared at him. His lips were blue, his skin pale, but there was no blood, no wound. "Poison," Leora said softly. Eleanor turned back to the manor. "Whoever was here wanted to silence the silent stones before we ever found them." Tristan knelt beside the body and pulled a small scroll from the inner cloak. He was carrying something. Eleanor opened it carefully. It was a final message, likely meant for Johanna. Short, urgent, asterisk, "The Black Seal has returned. Do not trust the council. North Hall is compromised. I am followed. Asterisk." Leora went pale. "The Black Seal. I thought they were gone." Eleanor looked between them. "What is it?" Leora looked down at the body. "A secret order of spies and enforcers loyal not to the throne, but to those who paid highest. They were purged decades ago, or so we thought. If they're back and embedded in our court." Eleanor finished the sentence for her. "Then the threat isn't over. It's just beginning again." That night, as they prepared to ride back to the capital, Eleanor sat alone at the edge of the woods, watching the lights of North Hall flicker behind her. They'd found no survivors, only echoes of a secret that had nearly vanished. But now that secret was awake again, and it was watching. When she returned to the castle, her first move was quiet. She had the name Black Seal whispered into the right ears. She watched which courtiers twitched, who went silent, who changed their patterns. She reopened Johanna's letters, searching for hidden signs, old codes, and buried clues. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. A ring of names, nobles, traitors, guards, some long dead, some still active. They weren't just loyal to Berehal. They were part of something older, darker. When Eleanor finally sat across from Queen Agnes days later, she placed the map of North Hall between them. "The Black Seal is back," she said, "and they never really left. They were waiting, nesting." Agnes didn't flinch. "Then we smoked them out." Eleanor nodded. This won't be a court war. It'll be fought in shadows, in whispers, with truths that no one dares speak aloud. Agnes placed a hand on her daughters. You were never meant to be the quiet queen. And Eleanor, eyes sharp, replied, I don't plan to be, because now the real war was just beginning. And this time, it would not be fought on paper. It would be fought in silence, in hidden halls, in the hearts of those brave enough to face the dark. The days that followed blurred into one another. Quiet meetings behind locked doors, coded messages exchanged in passing glances, maps redrawn under candlelight. Eleanor didn't sleep much. Neither did Leora. The entire castle seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves knew that something terrible was stirring again, just beneath the surface. But this time, Eleanor was no longer the uncertain daughter hiding behind her mother's shadow. She was at the center of it now, eyes wide open. One evening, while reviewing old council rosters with Beatrix, Eleanor's gaze caught a name she'd seen on Aidan's final scroll. Not circled, not emphasized, but it was there. Lord Edrin of Baymere, a quiet man, loyal on paper, absent from most public gatherings, not high-ranking enough to draw attention, but always nearby, always present. Eleanor tapped the parchment with her finger. Him. He's been mentioned twice. Once in Johanna's notes, and again in that map from North Hall. Beatrix leaned closer. Edrin's been around since your father's reign. I thought he'd retired. He hasn't, Eleanor said. He just stepped back into the shadows. By the next morning, Tristan had discreetly followed Edrin's movements. The Lord rarely stayed in the main court. Instead, he kept to the lower west wing, an older part of the castle that had once been servant quarters, long before Eleanor was born. He meets with no one in the open, Tristan reported. But at night, someone visits. A cloaked figure, small build, not one of ours. Could it be another agent? Eleanor asked. Or worse, Beatrix muttered. A messenger. Eleanor nodded. Then we set a trap. That evening, Eleanor hosted an informal gathering in the library, just enough of a distraction to keep attention focused on her and off the lower halls. Tristan took position behind the curtain in the west wing. Leora hid behind the old armory doors with one of her trusted spies. And when Lord Edrin stepped out of his room just after midnight, they were ready. The cloaked figure met him under the archway with a small pouch, which Edrin quickly tucked into his cloak. Tristan stepped forward. Going somewhere, my lord. Edrin froze, then slowly turned. A walk. Can't sleep. That's strange. Eleanor's voice rang from behind him. Because I sleep just fine when traitors are locked up where they belong. Edrin's face tightened. You have no cause. Eleanor gestured to the guards. We'll see what the council thinks of that pouch you're hiding. They found a wax seal inside, black and sharp-edged, marked with a serpent eating its own tail. The symbol Johanna had warned about in her final journal entry. Edrin's silence confirmed it all. Later, in the private chamber where he was questioned, he admitted everything, but not out of fear. Out of certainty. We were never trying to conquer, he said. We were trying to survive what's coming. Eleanor frowned. What does that mean? There's something older than kingdoms, Edrin replied. Older than crowns. A shadow growing in the north. The Black Seal wasn't created for conquest. It was created for preservation. And when your ancestors disbanded it, they left the realm blind. Leora leaned forward. Blind to what? Edrin's smile was bitter. To the real war. The one your sister discovered too late. After his confession, Edrin was imprisoned under the chapel tower, guarded by two of Leora's best. But his words lingered. Eleanor couldn't shake the way he'd spoken. Not with malice, but with grim confidence, as if they were all staring in the wrong direction. She pulled out Johanna's last journal again and returned to the entry that had haunted her most. Asterisk, if they come for me, it's because they fear what I saw. Asterisk, what had Johanna seen? Eleanor gathered Leora, Tristan, and Beatrix and returned to the war room under the stables. They laid everything out, maps, messages, confessions, seals, and began re-examining the pattern from a different angle. That mark, Leora said, pointing at the serpent on Edrin's seal. It's not just Black Seal. It's older. Pagan. Before the first royal bloodline. Eleanor's pulse quickened. You think this isn't just political? I think it started political, Beatrix said. But now it's something else. Leora nodded. Johanna didn't just uncover treason. She uncovered a system, something rooted in the foundation of this kingdom, something that doesn't want to be seen. They worked through the night, piecing together a trail, subtle patterns in history books, tales of lost settlements in the north, old disappearances no one ever connected. The story that emerged was bigger than Eleanor could have imagined. Centuries ago, before the founding of the current royal line, the land now known as Eldrin had been watched over by a council, not of kings, but of keepers, guardians. They had no thrones, no titles. Their purpose was to guard a boundary, an ancient barrier protecting the realm from something else, something that had once crossed over and nearly destroyed them all. The Black Seal was originally created not to betray the crown, but to protect it secretly and silently. But as the ages passed, the purpose was corrupted. The Guardians became puppets. Their knowledge was buried, their warning forgotten. And now, something had awakened. Eleanor leaned over the map, her hands trembling slightly. All this time, we thought we were fighting a kingdom, a court, a plot. Beatrix's voice was a whisper. But we were fighting history. That night, snow returned, thicker, heavier than it had all season. It blanketed the roads, covered the windows. The castle felt smaller somehow, like the walls were pressing inward. Eleanor stood in the highest tower again, staring north. She knew now what Johanna had discovered, what she'd been trying to warn them about. The political betrayal had only been the surface of something far deeper. And Edrin, misguided as he was, had been trying to prepare for it in his own secret, terrible way. We don't just need to rebuild, Eleanor whispered to herself. We need to remember. Behind her, Leora entered silently. There's a place, she said, north of Northall. No roads lead there anymore. But Johanna marked it in one of her maps. A valley, said to be cursed. The last place the keepers were seen. Eleanor turned toward her. Then that's where we go next. But if the stories are true, Leora said, we may not return. Eleanor's voice was calm. Then we make sure someone else does. Because now, Eleanor finally understood what it meant to be queen. Not to rule from a throne, but to carry the truth, even when it terrified you. Even when it meant riding into the dark with no promise of light. And she would carry it, because the stones were moving again. And this time, she would not let them fall. The journey north was unlike any Eleanor had taken before. The roads vanished beneath layers of snow as they climbed into the valley beyond Northall. No carriages, no towns, just the silence of trees and the soft crunch of hooves in untouched white. Leora guided them carefully, her memory piecing together trails that hadn't been used in decades. Beatrix rode close behind, watching every shadow. Tristan remained steady beside Eleanor, his expression unreadable but his eyes alert. They were no longer chasing rumors or reacting to danger. They were walking straight into it. By the third day, they reached a narrowing between two ridges, where the wind howled louder and the air changed. It smelled older, like stone and ash. There were no birds here, no animals, just the sound of snow brushing over branches and the feeling, unspoken, undeniable, that something ancient had once walked this land. At the center of the valley, half buried in snow and root, they found the remnants of a stone circle. Broken pillars, scatter markings, no sign of life, but no signs of death either. Just stillness. Eleanor stepped down from her horse and approached the center, where a small stone altar stood, cracked down the middle. Her hand hovered over it, then rested lightly on the cold surface. Aloha met her fingers, faint but real. This was it, Leora said, her voice barely a whisper. The last sight of the keepers, where they swore their oaths, and where the seal was first made. Beatrix walked the edge of the circle, inspecting the ruins. But whatever they were trying to protect us from, it's gone now, or buried too deep. Eleanor looked up at the sky, a pale stretch of gray above the trees. Maybe Johanna wasn't trying to stop something from happening. Maybe she was trying to remind us what had already been forgotten. Leora knelt by the altar, brushing snow aside. She revealed an old carving, part of the serpent symbol, worn nearly flat by time. They weren't fighting a monster. They were fighting ignorance and fear. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Eleanor said softly, "Then we don't need to fight shadows anymore. We need to build light." The ride back was slower, heavier, but more certain. They weren't returning with dramatic victories or captured villains. They were returning with something far more valuable: truth. Layered, difficult, often painful truth. And it was that truth that Eleanor brought back into the heart of the castle. She gathered the council not with fanfare, but in a quiet hall lined with torches. Agnes stood beside her, for once not speaking as queen, but simply as mother. Eleanor told them everything. About North Hall, about the old order, about the corruption that wasn't just treason, it was forgetting. Forgetting the roots of the realm, the secrets it was founded on, the darkness it had once overcome and could easily fall back into. Some in the council didn't understand. Some resisted. But others, the ones who'd watched this young woman rise from dutiful daughter to vigilant protector, knew this was not about legend. It was about safeguarding the future. Lord Edrin remained imprisoned, his confessions now written into the royal record. He spoke no more of ancient wars, but he didn't deny his role. He accepted his place in history with a strange, grim pride. The Silent Stones were revived, not in name, but in purpose. Eleanor didn't want spies and shadows. She wanted watchers, listeners, voices that reported not only danger, but truth. She reformed the lower courts, replaced corrupt scribes with those who'd proven loyal in silence. Leora trained a new generation, not warriors but keepers, quiet guardians of memory and justice. Beatrix stayed close, her wit as sharp as ever, but her loyalty deeper than before. She often reminded Eleanor to laugh. Even queens need breath, she'd say, and mischief now and then. Tristan returned to his post, but he was no longer just a guard. He became Eleanor's most trusted protector, her companion in every hard decision. Though they never spoke of what they could have been beyond duty, they never had to. Their bond was understood in glances, in battles fought together, and in the quiet moments between storms. And Agnes, for the first time in years, stepped back. She did not vanish. She advised, offered strength when needed, but she let Eleanor lead. Not as a girl thrust into royalty, but as a woman who had earned every inch of her crown. Years passed. The snow returned each winter, blanketing the kingdom in peace rather than fear. North Hall was rebuilt, not as a garrison, but as a sanctuary, a place of memory. The stone circle remained untouched, its ruins left in reverence. Children in villages began learning stories not just of kings and wars, but of queens who listened, of a lady who saw darkness and refused to close her eyes, of quiet revolutions made not with swords, but with truth. And late one evening, after a long day of council work, Eleanor walked alone through the gardens, now filled with winter blooms and soft candlelight. She stopped beneath the old oak where Johanna once read aloud. The breeze stirred the leaves gently. She closed her eyes and whispered, "We're still here," not because they had defeated all their enemies, but because they had faced what mattered most, the fear of forgetting. The brutal life royal women endured was never just about corsets, control, or being silenced. It was about carrying the weight of stories that others chose to hide, about surviving not just through grace, but through grit, about seeing what others refused to see. Eleanor had done all of that, and she had become something stronger than a symbol. She had become the story that others would now tell.